Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. Today there has been a hopeful development that I fear will be downplayed by the media, namely Ron Paul's second-place finish in the Iowa Ames presidential straw poll. Among the Republican candidates, Michele Bachmann won first place with 28.6% of the vote, or 4,823 votes, and Ron Paul won second place with 27.7% of the vote, or 4,671 votes, coming only 152 votes behind Michele Bachmann, and coming far ahead of the third place finisher, Tim Pawlenty, who had 13.6% of the votes and 2,293 votes in total, less than half the amount that Ron Paul received. And already we are seeing antics pulled by newspapers owned by Rupert Murdoch's News Corporation, with headlines like, Michele Bachmann comes in first, Tim Pawlenty comes in third. Of course, that raises the question of who is the second place finisher, but we have seen this before in the 2008 Nevada caucuses, when Ron Paul also won second place. Fox News, another subsidiary of Murdoch's media conglomerate, reported the first place finisher and the third place finisher. On television, it was even easier to omit any mention of Ron Paul whatsoever. There are other articles which subtly downplay the emphasis on Ron Paul, for instance by bolding the names of all of the candidates who are mentioned except Ron Paul, or by giving Ron Paul short shrift, mentioning him in one sentence, and then moving on to candidates who have actually performed very poorly in the Ames Straw Poll, such as Mitt Romney and Rick Perry. Rick Perry got 4.3% of the vote, or 718 votes. Mitt Romney got even fewer votes, 567, and 3.4% of the votes, and yet somehow a lot of these articles manage to, while trying to keep a straight face, focus the discussion on Perry and Romney. This seems very odd to me, but not altogether surprising considering that Ron Paul poses such a great challenge to the dominant political establishment, and the mainstream media establishment is very much aligned with the dominant political establishment. Not only are the political rules of the game skewed in favor of the large politically connected media corporations, but also the media conglomerates themselves have an interest in getting certain candidates elected. Ron Paul, who has always been an outsider to the establishment, doesn't fit into that picture. But furthermore, it's important to observe how much Ron's performance has improved since his 2007 finish in the same Iowa Ames straw poll. 9.1% was the share of the vote that he received back then, and he came in fifth place. So in terms of percentages, this was more than a threefold improvement. And yet, all he gets in some articles is a passing mention. Now, to be fair, others do cover him in greater depth, and he has made it onto some headlines, thankfully, with the prevalence of internet media, which have also developed considerably since 2007 and 2008, he has a greater chance of obtaining visibility and exposure and recognition. And of course, recent economic and political developments have served to greatly vindicate Ron Paul and some of his warnings about the course that the United States would take if the current political establishment were to remain in charge. And what are we seeing today? We are seeing reckless inflation driven by the Federal Reserve that has increased the monetary base considerably since 2008, and that continues to engage in what is euphemistically dubbed quantitative easing, which is really flat-out money creation in an attempt to prevent declining consumer prices, even though declining consumer prices are one of the best ways to alleviate the pain that consumers are feeling during this recession. The Federal Reserve continues to pump money into the economy. The Federal Reserve continues to bail out favored politically connected financial institutions, the very same institutions whose dubious practices precipitated the recession in the first place. We have the banks who made dubious loans bailed out and growing in size and consolidating and wrongfully foreclosing on homeowners. At the same time, ordinary Americans who haven't really fueled this recession are getting laid off and foreclosed on and getting absolutely no substantive relief. The substantive relief would be more liberty. The substantive relief would be ceasing to artificially favor politically connected institutions and letting ordinary individuals have a chance in the free market, where they would fare much better than under the current system of corporatism, quite different from a free market system. Ron Paul, in a far more prescient manner than I knew back in 2007 and 2008, warned of the folly of continuing U.S. involvement in Afghanistan and Iraq, where our interventions have accomplished nothing. Thousands of U.S. troops have died. Many, many more, tens and hundreds of thousands of civilians have died. Numerous cruelties have been committed by U.S. soldiers since the last presidential election. Under the Obama administration, there have been notorious kill teams in Afghanistan that murdered innocent civilians just for the heck of it and boasted about it, displayed trophies of innocent people who were brutally, mercilessly slaughtered. And this is what American taxpayers are paying for. This is what the United States is getting into debt for. This is why the debacle over the debt ceiling recently was so comical, because it would be so easy to resolve the crippling deficits that the U.S. federal government is incurring today by simply withdrawing American troops from Iraq and Afghanistan and the absolutely counterproductive bombing campaign in Libya, and instead focusing on reforming the many, many problems within the U.S. federal government. Another great way to reduce the federal deficit dramatically would be to end the pointless, counterproductive war on drugs that has resulted in numerous completely innocent people having their homes raided in the middle of the night by SWAT teams, having their pets killed without any provocation, even if those people had never even consumed illegal drugs. Many of the casualties in the drug war have been people whom the police have mistaken for alleged drug offenders. And of course, there's the entire question of the U.S. federal government spending billions of taxpayer dollars on persecuting individuals who essentially commit victimless crimes, who harm nobody but themselves in their consumption of currently illegal drugs. And of course, we have the Obama administration perpetuating the policy of torturing detainees, withholding from them their right to a fair trial, failing to fulfill Obama's own promise of closing down the U.S. facility in Guantanamo Bay, maintaining the notorious black sites in Afghanistan, which are essentially CIA torture sites. We have the indignities visited upon American travelers by the Transportation Security Administration, where now in most airports, individuals are faced with the heinous alternative of being groped in their most intimate areas or being virtually strip searched. And of course, the Obama administration has introduced the health insurance mandate, a clearly unconstitutional provision that will hopefully be struck down by the Supreme Court. But clearly, if the federal government can force individuals to purchase health insurance, what can't it force individuals to purchase? If the federal government can require individuals to submit to indignities at the airport involving their most intimate body parts, what can't it force individuals to submit to? This is what's at stake in this election. The political establishment is foisting upon us increasingly what is outright tyranny, not just the inefficiencies of a welfare state, but the deliberate subjugation of individuals to the wishes and whims of political elites. And this is what Ron Paul stands against. This is why the establishment does not like Ron Paul. And this is why the establishment and its allies in the mainstream media downplay the significance of his performance. Now, I will grant that the Iowa Ames Straw Poll is not a predictor of presidential success. It has successfully predicted the victory of George W. Bush, and it had also successfully predicted the Republican candidacy of Bob Dole in 1995. However, on other instances in the past, it has not successfully predicted the winning Republican candidate. However, when a news organization is reporting on the Iowa Ames Straw Poll, it should be fair in how it covers the results. If somebody placed highly, that person should receive a substantive share of the coverage. That only makes sense. Now, somebody might come back to me and say, well, you're devoting more time in this broadcast to Ron Paul than to the first place finisher, Michele Bachmann. And I will say that Michele Bachmann's theoconservative ways do scare me. And it seems that there is a struggle within the Republican Party right now between the theoconservative elements, as represented by Bachmann, and the libertarian elements as represented by Ron Paul. However, I will point out that what I am doing right now is an editorial broadcast. It is a commentary on Ron Paul, and certainly involves my expression of strong support for him. It is not a reporting of the news. A purportedly objective, factual report of the news needs to focus on the facts in terms of their relative significance. So, of course, a focus on Michele Bachmann's performance would be warranted in a factual news article, but so would a focus on Ron Paul's performance more so than on Pawlenty's performance or Romney and Perry, who didn't even formally set up operations in Iowa to participate in this straw poll. But there is hope that this time around, the emerging grassroots online media will be able to counteract the deceptive effects of the mainstream media, and that also the mainstream media will not be able to ignore Ron Paul nearly to the same extent as had taken place in 2007 and 2008. It seems like Ron Paul might be subjected to a catch-22 from the mainstream media, in the sense that if he wins something like the Iowa Ames Straw Poll, as he had won during the poll at the Conservative Political Action Conference earlier, the entire poll can be dismissed as non-predictive or irrelevant, as the CPAC poll had been by many media outlets. If he does poorly, then the mainstream media can use that as confirmation that Ron Paul is never going to succeed. And if he makes a respectable finish, such as second place, certain mainstream media organizations, particularly the Murdoch-affiliated ones, can conveniently ignore him. This is, of course, unethical and unacceptable. It is not good journalism. It is utter deception and subtle propaganda. I would rather have them editorialize against Ron Paul than pull tricks like that meant to distract attention away from him. But hopefully, the American people are smarter than that. Hopefully they will be able to see the problem in that kind of approach, and hopefully they will be able to see the numerous problems and indignities that Ron Paul was entirely correct in predicting and attempting to reverse. I think this time it's imperative that Ron Paul win the Republican nomination, and it's imperative that Ron Paul win the presidency, because he is one of the only politicians with a sense of integrity. And he is one of the only politicians who really sees the horrendous mess that this country is steadily degenerating toward. I will continue offering commentary on Ron Paul and his 2012 presidential run, and it should go without saying that I strongly endorse his campaign for the presidency.